Welcome to the Glen Merzer Show, where we talk all things vegan. If you're not already vegan, no worries, we'll get you there. If you are, tune in for health advice, information on climate change, and all the damage done by our most destructive industry, animal agriculture. We'll also talk cooking, theater, film, and culture. My 2 reasons for starting this podcast: to entertain, to inform, and to make people vegan. Oh, that's 3. Shit. Welcome to the Glen Merzer Show. You can find us across all your favorite podcast platforms. You could find us on YouTube. And please remember to subscribe. Just click the red button. You can find us at realmeneatplants.com. What follows is an event that was recorded in the summer of 2024 with Paul Chatlin and Dr. John Tanner. The event is called Back from the Brink because both Paul and John came back from the brink. They had serious heart conditions and came very, very close to death, especially Dr. Tanner was perhaps minutes away from death. They both found a whole food plant-based diet. So enjoy this event and learn from the lessons of Paul and John. All right. Thank you for watching. Hello, I'm Glen Merzer, your host today for the Plant Powered Passport. We have an exciting afternoon today because we have 2 gentlemen who each had their lives threatened by heart disease and came right up to the brink of what could have been the end if they didn't make changes to their lifestyle. Later, we will hear from Dr. John Tanner. John has a PhD in computer science from Caltech. He's the founder of Tanner Research, and he's the founder of NuSci, that's nutritionscience.org. But first, we're going to hear from Paul Chatlin, who is the founder of the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group, or pbnsg.org. He's also the co-founder of the Sage Circle Alliance, and he's going to tell you his story of coming back from the brink. So, Paul Chatlin, welcome to the Plant Powered Passport.
I'm honored to be here. I really am.
Well, Paul, I'm looking forward to hearing your story, and so are our listeners, so I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. My name is Paul Chatlin, and let me start out by saying, please ask me questions. I do much better with answering questions than I do telling my story. So once again, my name is Paul Chatlin, and I am the founder of the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group. So I guess we start at the very beginning. When I was a young man, between the ages of 10 and let's say 12 years old, my family was centered around my father and his 3 brothers. And in that 3-year period, 2.5-year period, all 4 needed bypass surgery, and they were in their 50s. 2 of my uncles never made it off the operating table. My favorite uncle was never mentally the same and was institutionalized. And I saw my dad, who did make it, cry for the first time in my life. And he did it for 3-4 days. And I would see him at the hospital. I think I was about 12 years old. And it was a scary place. And it was even scarier seeing how much my dad was hurting. So now we fast forward just a little bit. And I am 28 years old. I now have 2 young men and a cholesterol problem. My cholesterol was about 347, and I was under doctor care, and he suggested that I start taking some type of statin. So we started with Zocor, and after about a week, I had really problems walking. I got the side effects, the high muscle enzymes that are the side effects of Zocor. So he took me off it. 2 days later, I was fine. And then about a week later, he put me on Lipitor. Everyone's heard of Lipitor. Unfortunately, about 6 months into it, I got the side effects of Lipitor. The only other statin at that time was a drug called pravastatin, and it was the weakest of the three statins. And he had me on the max amount, and all he could do between the age of 28 and 54 was keep my cholesterol level at about 280. It never lowered much, never went up that high, but he was saying all the time, like, this is the best we could do. You have a high cholesterol. And, back then, and almost right now, the doctor would say, well, let's go with skim milk, try to reduce the amount of cheese you have, a little bit of cutting down on red meat, go to fish. That's what they knew, or that's what he suggested. And I followed the doctor's orders, but my cholesterol stayed at, right around 280. And then one day at the age of 54, I was at a meeting and I started just sweating profusely. I had to excuse myself, got out to the hallway thinking that, maybe I should go home because my chest was really hurting and I could not take more than 7 steps without just stopping. And I had to wait there for a good, 5 minutes until I could continue walking. And that continued. So I made a doctor's appointment with my doctor, and we did this battery of tests, and he heard a heart murmur. A quick question from Glenn. What were the side effects of Lipitor? Glenn, the side effects of Lipitor were the same side effects I got with Zocor, which was elevated muscle enzymes. It was elevated enough that he thought I might have MS. I went to the MS clinic, and it turned out it was just the side effects of the statin. Thank you, Glenn. So now I go to the doctor, and he heard a heart murmur he had not heard before. So immediately he made me an appointment the next week with a cardiologist that he was connected to. I did all the series of tests up to the heart catheter and the heart biopsy. And when I was done with all the tests, the doctor said, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years, and I believe that you're going to need either bypass or, I'm sorry to say, a heart transplant. Well, the bypass is one thing because I was right in that wheelhouse of being in my mid-50s like my dad and my uncles, and that scared me enough. But when they said heart transplant, I knew that I was in some really bad shape. And truly, when they say, angina is like an elephant sitting on your chest, it's true. So on the way home, I had not said a word to my wife because I love her so much. I did not want her to worry, but now I was worried. So I stopped by her office. I went into a conference room and I started laying out what I've been doing and what's been wrong. And, the tears were flowing between the two of us, and her boss walked in. Her boss looked at me and said, what is going on? Because my wife is not much of a crier, and I'm never a crier. I had upset her, and she was worried. And he said, just hold on for a second. I'll get back with you. About a half an hour to an hour later, he said, I got you an appointment at the Cleveland Clinic, and it was the day before I was scheduled to have a heart catheter and biopsy at the local hospital. So my wife and I went out to the Cleveland Clinic, a place I had never been to, but it is the heart hospital. And they assigned me to a doctor who was the head of heart transplant because he had gotten all the information from the local doctor, and they assigned him to a heart transplant doctor because they thought that that's what I might need. So I get in there, and it's interesting. I went through the same battery of tests that I did locally. And then about 7 o'clock, I was shaved top to bottom, and I was wheeled in for the heart catheter. And my doctor was there. And, they put you in something called twilight. So I could kind of understand what he's saying, but couldn't really make it out. A very scary place for a person who had never been in the operating room of a major hospital. And I kept hearing him say, yes, yes, yes. And finally, when the procedure was done with the heart catheter, and yes, I had it done through my wrist as opposed to my groin, which allowed the recovery to be cut in half. And I asked him, well, why were you like saying yes, yes, yes? He says, well, the good news is you don't need a heart transplant, but your right artery is 100% blocked. So I was totally prepped for surgery, and I was starting to get wheeled into the surgical area for surgery. And right at the door, he stopped and he said, I've only offered this to one person in 20 years, but if you're willing to make a lifestyle change, maybe we don't need the surgery today. And I said yes. Now, I said yes to something I had no idea what a lifestyle change even meant. What I did do is when I was on that gurney being wheeled in, I made a promise. And I think all of us have made this type of promise before. And the promise was, God, if you get me out of this mess, I promise to serve the rest of my life. So here I was, right at the surgical operating area, and he takes out his cell phone and he calls somebody. And he says, hey, Essie, I've got somebody I'd like you to talk to. I believe he'd be good for a lifestyle change. Again, I didn't know what it meant. So I grabbed the phone from him, he handed me the phone, and it was Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. And he said, just go on home after recovery, and I'll give you a call in the morning. By the time we got home after recovery, it was 3 a.m, and Dr. Esselstyn called me 8 o'clock sharp. We spent about 45 minutes to an hour on the phone. And, I listened to everything he had to say. I immediately went out and got his book, read it end to end in a couple days. And I kept thinking to myself, this is going to be interesting. Now, to give you a kind of a perspective of where I was, I had in a health, from a health standpoint, I had an enlarged heart. I was a workoutaholic. At that point, I weighed about 230 pounds, but I was a weightlifter, and I was somewhat of an athlete, and I worked out virtually every day. And I also had leaky valves, scarsidosis of the right side of the aorta. I had a left bundle block and 100% block on my right artery and a heart murmur. So I was a real mess. So the doctors decided they first needed to shrink the heart so the valves wouldn't be leaking as bad. And to do that, they put me on a medication that would literally have me fall asleep for 16 hours a day. Let me stop right there. Another question. Do you have any idea why the doctor chose you and almost no one else in 20 years? That's a great question. He said it was a personality thing. I mean, basically, my doctor, who was the head of heart transplant at the Cleveland Clinic, his mentor in med school was Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. So I, at that moment, received multiple miracles getting into the Cleveland Clinic, being assigned the one doctor whose mentor was Caldwell Esselstyn, and having to be able to talk to Caldwell Esselstyn right there on the spot. And so I'm going to take you back. So now I'm back home. I've read the book, but I'm really sick. So I spent the next 60 days sleeping 16 hours a day. And if anybody knows me, that was a tall order, but when I'd wake up, all I could do is cook. And, quite honestly, I was not a good cook. Okay. So, and I did cook. So I knew I needed to learn how to cook. And you think back about 12 years ago, there were only a handful of plant-based cookbooks out there. Today, there's hundreds. So I decided to go to the Esselstyn cooking class. And I think the amount was $700, $800. I got the receipt at the end, and I tried to expense it through Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and they denied me. And I said, oh my goodness, this is what I'm going to do. This is my gurney promise. I'm going to go after and work with Blue Cross Blue Shield and get a pay code. So if anybody in the future wants to make a lifestyle change, then they'll be able to expense that by going to this cooking class. But a month later, I found out from Blue Cross Blue Shield at the highest level that I would need to work with the Michigan legislature to make that type of pay code change. And that was about an hour and 45 minutes or so from my house. So I said, this is just not going to work for me. So instead, I said, well, I'm starting to feel better. The weight was just pouring off me. And I said, what, maybe what I'll do is I'll put an ad in the paper for $20. And I'll say, I made a lifestyle change. I gave up meat, dairy, and oil and replaced that with fruits and vegetables, beans, and whole grains. Let me just say this. I did not love a lot of vegetables. Fruits were okay. Whole wheat was all right. I didn't mind beans, but just starting to eat all these vegetables and salads. But I said to myself, I will do this no matter what. And let's see if the angina goes away, or maybe I'll make something that I could repeat and enjoy. So I started eating this way. And in about 14 days, those beans and the kale salads and all the things I never enjoyed my whole life, I started to like. I don't say I loved it, because I did not. But even to this day, I'm okay with it. And part of it, the success of making this lifestyle change was kind of looking at your life saying, okay, I used to live to eat. Now I have to eat to live. And it's the other things that it might allow me to do that will be my daily motivation. So I continued this plant-based journey, and was able to drop about 65 pounds, and I've kept it off. And the best news was that my cholesterol, which was baseline at 280 for almost 30 years, was now down to under 70. So something was working. Also, after about the 14th or 15th day, I was able to, the angina went away. I have another question. What was your diet like before switching to a whole food plant-based diet? I I loved food. Okay. So I was the guy who would walk into a restaurant and would say, hey, I'd like a Coca-Cola, but give me 3 of them. The person who made the oil dipping with the different spices and the bread, I'd say, give me about 2 loaves or 3 loaves of bread and extra oil. I figured as long as I kept working out every day, that would make up for the diet. So I was a happy eater, but not a healthy eater. So now I put an ad in the paper, and within 2 days, I got 20 people who sent me a message saying, I'd like to be invited to your house. So 20 people came to my house, and I introduced them to my appliances, all the food I was eating, and I taught them how to label read, because that was the most important thing I did. And I was just shocked at the amount of bad salt and sugar and oils that are in every food that most people eat. And I thought, wow, this was great. This is my give back. But I thought, maybe I'll do it again. And generally, if you repeat something, it may be a little bit less the amount of people who would show up. But again, within 2-3 days, another 20 people signed up. And again, went through the same process. But there were a lot of medical questions that were being asked of me that I didn't feel comfortable answering. So I realized I needed to have a doctor, and maybe even a bigger venue. So I called the local cardiologist, head of cardiology in the 3 hospitals. And I said, can you give me the name of a lifestyle doctor, a lifestyle cardiologist who I could talk to? They all gave me 3 names. One name was repeating. It was Dr. Joel Kahn. I never had met or heard of Dr. Joel Kahn up to that moment. So I called him, introduced myself. I went to his house, and I never called the other 2 doctors. He joined me. We were able to find a much bigger venue at Beaumont Hospital. And we had our very first meeting where we thought maybe 20, 30, 40 people would show up. We had 123. And we did it again the following month, and we had 141. And about 2 days before the 3rd meeting, the hospital decided that we could not continue meeting there. So here I was with 141 names, and I had to give them a place to go to. And I always bring this up in my story, that the Birmingham community schools, that's Birmingham Groves and Seaholm, opened up their heart and their doors to the plant-based nutrition support group. And that is when PBNSG was born. So we just started over the next 10 years having once a month meetings, and we bring in people from all over the country to speak. And we've had the who's who of the plant-based nutrition people that are out there. If you name them, I've met them. And it was wonderful because we'd come in, they'd fly in, I'd pick them up. We'd go to 2 or 3 medical schools and talk to the students. And then we'd have a big event where we'd get, 400 to 800, 900 people. And it was, a big community. So as we continued over that 10 years, we started something called small groups, where it was small, every city around the Michigan area, Detroit area, if they were interested, they would have their own little community group. And we grew to 54 small groups. And at the same time, unfortunately, we all experienced COVID, and we had to do a hard shutdown. So think about it. The organization had 54 small groups. we had a speaker event, we had multiple culinary events, and we were seeing a really incredible growth and a place for people to get together and be with like-minded people. So we stopped immediately because when I heard about COVID in January, and we had a meeting in February because we met every month, I knew that the majority of our members were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and I couldn't live with myself if anyone got sick from COVID. So we pivoted immediately and became the biggest and now the only plant-based support group in the world. And just for those who are listening, you could become a member for just $10 a month or $120 a year. No discounts because it's only $10. And you still get to get speaker events, culinary events. And instead of having the small groups, we went to heart disease support groups, diabetes support groups, house divided support groups, kitchen gadget support groups, on and on. We've got 15 of them. So if you want to be with like-minded people, you could attend our events 18 times, 19 times a month. So today we have about 350 virtual members. We have a reach of a couple 100,000 on social media. We have an email list that's about 120,000 people. And the plant-based nutrition support group is, I'm most proud of, still in business. So one of the things I do is I write these open letters. I'm going to kind of segue into the other side of my activities. I write these open letters. I think it's kind of catharsis for me because I get to just, write about what I think about at the time. And about a year and a half ago, I wrote an open letter saying that I found it interesting that you have the Dairy Association and other kind of the meat packers union, and you have other associations, alliances, or unions that promote people's bad health, but you never hear a word from them because they're all doing so well. And I thought, what would it be like if we could bring everybody under the whole food plant-based umbrella and we could all work together as one and have a voice? So I wrote this open letter, and within a day, my other co-founder, Meryl Fury out of Chicago, who is I think, president of the plant-based nutrition movement, called me up and said, let's do this. So for the next year, we worked behind the scenes to create the Sage Circle Alliance. And you could reach the Sage Circle Alliance simply by emailing or typing in sagecirclealliance.org. And we've got about 45 members. And the idea of the Sage Circle Alliance is it allows not the people at the very top of the plant-based world, they're doing probably quite well, but it allows that next big tier to share resources, share ideas. If you're a young entrepreneur that's looking to go into the vegan world, and I'm going to make this distinction, the plant-based nutrition support group started as a heart disease organization, but got bigger through working with diabetes, certain cancers, obesity. But at the core, we're still a heart disease, no oil group without judgment. So wherever you are in your life's travels, join us and we'll hold your hand along the way without judgment. The Sage Circle Alliance, though, because Meryl and I have such a love for animals and we worry about the planet, is more of a vegan organization. And honestly, we did it to get a wider audience. So if you're, for example, a young entrepreneur and you're looking at going into business, the 45 members that we have could help you do it. We have speakers, nutritionists, doctors. We have an IT side of our business, a marketing side of our business. We have web development. We have support groups. And the number one thing that our 501c3, we're a for-profit and a nonprofit. And if you want to join the Sage Circle Alliance, just go to the website. We have 7 different options. I believe that would appeal to you. And if you need help in any way, shape, or form, just let us know and we'll help you. But the Sage Circle Alliance is here to make the awareness of the planet, compassion toward animals, and be a resource for all of its members. So, yes, I stay very busy every day, but the goal is always the same, which is I promised I would serve people and tell the story, because every day to this day, I wake up knowing I'm the luckiest person, not the luckiest, but a very lucky person, that it was the food that was hurting me. And, it's been quite a journey. One other little side note I want to share with the audience before I'm done for today is about a year and a half ago, I started getting some angina again. And it was alarming because I've been whole food, plant-based, no oil for, at that point, 11 years. And the angina wasn't as painful, but it made me, reminded me of the angina I had when I couldn't walk 7 steps. So, excuse me, I went to the doctors again, and they did a full lipid panel. And it turned out my LP, which is lipoprotein little a, was at 350. And the number you should be at is 50 or less. And I'm like, how can this be? Well, this one is genetic. So what I've learned is, when you're born with it, at the age of 2, it doesn't really change from 2 to 60 or 65, 70. And I had an elevated LP little a. Well, at that point, there was no other option other than hoping one day they would have a shot for it or a cure for it. They do have, so I sent in an open letter, a different one to the world saying, if you have high LP little a, what should you do? And somebody sent me a message saying, until they have a drug for it, here's a 18 supplement regimen, and we believe it could help you lower it. So for the next year, I took 18 different supplements a day. And the good news was it did take it from 350 down to 203. So there was a big reduction. But 203 is still way too high. And as a result of that, I had to get a stent. And to the audience, that was kind of a blow to me, because I just thought I had made so many changes to myself, to my wife, to my family, because unfortunately the world still is not set up properly to help people. For example, it's still not being taught in medical schools. Doctors, when they see you, they don't ask you, tell me what you eat. When you go to the hospital, they don't serve you plant-based meals to get you healthier. They serve you meals that continue the cycle. So what I'm saying to everybody in the audience is, please have your LP little a checked. Now, at this moment, they have 3 lipoprotein little a studies. I happen to be in one of them. I'm in the phase 3 part of it. And I don't know whether I got the shot or the placebo, but in phase 2, in the pharmaceutical company I'm connected with, they saw a 95% reduction in the LP little a number, which is just absolutely shocking. And I'm a big fan of taking advantage of the best of both Western and Eastern medicine. So sometimes it can't be just, lifestyle change. Sometimes you need some help, with an injection of something that might assist or help you. I have not seen any side effects from it. So please, like I said, next time you go to the doctor, have your lipoprotein little a checked. You don't have to necessarily have a full lipid panel. You could just say, I just want a lipid panel for LP little a. And if the number's high, you could always reach out to me and I'll give you some thoughts and suggestions. So as we wrap this up, I want to let you know you can reach me directly at paul@pbnsg.org, or you can look at our website and become a member, and that could be www.pbnsg.org. And also, please consider, if you want to be part of a community that cares about animals, the planet, and will share resources, and they're some of the nicest people. Glen is part of it. Please go to one long word, sagecirclealliance.org. So as I wrap it up, I want to say thank you for listening to me, and have a wonderful day. All right. Thank you so much.
I want to ask you one question before I let you go. Um, did you ever go back to your doctors who said that you're going to need either a heart transplant or bypass and say, look, actually, I didn't. I just have celery and carrots and brown rice?
Glenn, that is such a great question because, like I go to okay, so here's the fun story about that. So I go to the dermatologist, okay? And you know how when you walk in, they have a list of all the doctors that are in that office. My dermatologist had just moved. So I'm looking at the board, and there it was, the doctor who looked at me and said, before I had the heart catheter and biopsy done, I never had the biopsy, but the heart catheter, the doctor who said, oh yeah, you're going to need bypass immediately or a transplant, his name was there. So I walked into his office. I waited a half an hour just to say, hey, doctor, I don't need to say his name. Look at me. Look, I haven't had anything. And you were ready to cut me open or replace my heart. And, like he looked at me and he said, well, yeah, he was just like deflective, he was like, yeah, you got very lucky that it all lined up. Generally doctors don't know about, nutrition. They're not, then they're not taught it in school. But that always comes to like a sore spot for me because, I think when you sign your name, it should mean something. And when I think they sign off for the Hippocratic Oath, or at least they take the oath, or bend the knee to the oath. And, one of the codicils of that is to not injure anybody if they, do no harm. Right. So it's tough for me in this world we live in with all the internet and all the information to believe that doctors are just putting their head in the sand and don't know anything about the benefits of nutrition before pills or procedures. Right. I don't believe it. So to me, I was guns blazing, but once he started saying I didn't learn it in school, I hear that all the time. So I just let it go and I just compartmentalize it. But that was a great question because when I saw his name, I was like, wah. I was like, I'm going to see this guy and show him I'm 65 pounds less. I feel great every single day. And you are going to replace my heart or at least give me some type of bypass. So great question, Glenn. Thank you.
You'd think that doctors would have a little bit of curiosity.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul, for sharing your story. I'll let you go now, and we'll bring on Dr. John Tanner.
All right, if you've ever wanted to show off your plant-based lifestyle and do it in style, here's your chance. We have some of the most amazing t-shirts, hats, accessories, coffee mugs, and more at shop.realmeneatplants.com. We have statement t-shirts that will bring a smile to everyone's face. I love the I want tofu tonight tee. Plus, we have podcast tees, Real Women Eat Plants gear, Real Kids Eat Plants, and Real People Eat Plants, just in case men, women, and kids didn't cover it all. Yeah, we love you and love that you want to show off that healthy lifestyle of yours. Again, check out our high-quality gear at shop.realmeneatplants.com and enjoy.
Hey, John, how are you? Oh, can't hear you.
How's that? How about now?
Better now.
All right, thanks. That was great hearing Paul's story. Wow, I have some things in common with him, but some things are a little different too. So that was a fun story.
All right. Well, for the audience again, John Tanner has a PhD in computer science from Caltech. He is the founder of nusci.org, a site you should visit. It has a lot of nutritional information. That's nusci.org. He's a good friend of mine, and he's going to tell you his dramatic story now. John, take it away.
Thanks. Well, this was supposed to be back from the brink, and it is sort of. I'm not free of this problem just yet. It's just as Paul wasn't quite done with his problems. But I do want to share with you my path. I thought I would focus more in this time on my medical treatments so that people can get an idea of what the medical establishment might try to do to people, and maybe how you can intervene in a positive way. So my story starts in 2009. I was age 52. Unlike Paul, I didn't have any real warnings that I was at risk. I was running a mile a day. I'd done it for 5 years, almost every morning. And then one time in the middle of my run, this was October 2009, according to the people who saw me, I was running fine. I staggered a couple of steps and hit the ground unconscious with my heart stopped. This is what often happens with heart disease. There's no warning. This is a disease of the insides of your arteries that you can't see from the outside. There's no nerve endings in there. You can think you're perfectly healthy, and the next moment you're down on the ground with your heart stopped. Now, the survival rate is about 3%, so I was really lucky to survive, but I did. And they transported me to the hospital, and they put in a bare metal stent. This was a doctor that I didn't know, a hospital I'd never been to. It's just the closest one to where the ambulance could drive me. And the doctor put in, again, a bare metal stent. They inserted it through an incision in my femoral artery, that is my thigh groin area. They put a catheter in there, and they slide the compressed metal mesh tube, which is the stent. They push it into the up the artery around the aorta, and then into the small little blood vessels that feed the heart, and found the one that was clogged. Insert this compressed metal mesh tube through there, and then with a balloon inside the metal mesh, a cylindrical balloon, they inflate that and pump it up, and it mashes the stent, opens it up, and mashes it into the wall of the artery. And looking at the angiograms from that time, which I have, it looks like amazing technology. Before they put this in, you could see the clog that was there. As I learned more about this over the years, I was forced to conclude that I did that to myself by eating animal products, meat, dairy, lots of oil. So I did that to myself, and they put this device in there and got my blood flowing through that clog again. And for a while, I was quite impressed with that. But in 3 months' time, I was starting to have troubles again. I was at that point, I had changed my 1 mile run to 2 miles. One of the physical therapists said, you really need a longer period of time for elevated heart rate to, be in shape. So I was running 2 miles just fine. And then one day, I got about 1.5 miles in, I felt this weird thing in my chest. I wouldn't describe it as pain, but it was sort of like almost complete exhaustion levels, like, oh, something's wrong. I got to quit running and walk. So I did. And then finished, came back to the house that day. But then the next morning, I'm out running again, and it happened again, not at 1.5 miles, but 1 mile. And then the next morning, it was at 0.5 mile. And I thought, this isn't good. I better go in. So I went into the hospital, asked for a cardiologist that I knew. He happened to be my son's Boy Scout troop leader. And I thought he would look after me. And after he heard what I said, he didn't even check me. He said, "You're going right into the hospital." So they checked me in. They said, I'm really going to need another stent inside that first stent. And my friend would make sure that I had the best care available. But this was a Friday morning that I went in to the hospital, and they checked my blood. And at the time, I was on blood thinners because I'd had this stent a few months before. And so they said, well, we can't do this catheterization and restenting when you're on blood thinners. We got to wait until your blood can clot again. So they checked me on Saturday, still no good. Checked me on Sunday. Oh, okay, I'm ready to go. problem is my friend had set up for me to get the best care possible. That was on Friday, but they go home for the weekend. And on Sunday, this is not the A team or the B team. This is the C team. I got a young guy who I asked him at one point, how many stents have you put in? And he said, about 30. So I'm thinking, well, okay, if you do this once a day, you've been doing this for about a month. It wasn't very confidence inspiring, but he got me on the table and was looking at the angiogram. Now this time I was awake. The first time I got the stent, I was unconscious. I don't know anything about that. But this time they asked me, do I want to be conscious or not? Yeah, I want to know what's going on. So I was conscious. Now, backing up a little bit, after my first stent, I had a friend send me a paper from a medical journal written by this guy by the name of Caldwell Esselstyn. You've heard this name already from Paul. And this paper suggested that the treatment for heart problems today was not the best, and that maybe there was this other thing called diet that could help. And I got to his book, read it cover to cover, started eating the way he recommended. So I'd been eating that way for about 2 months when I'm back on the table and got this young guy who's looking at my existing stent, and he sees the problem. Oh, by the way, I should say, in this book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Esselstyn, there's a couple of pictures in there of another gentleman who had a heart problem in the same coronary artery as I did, the left anterior descending. But in this case, this guy, it was so ragged that they couldn't stent it, and he had no choice but to go on this diet. And they took a picture of that artery 2.5 years later, and it had healed itself. That guy's problem was gone because he changed the diet. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do that. But keep in mind that this guy who had this healed artery, reborn artery, didn't get the stent, but I did. And so I found eventually that depending on what study you look at, the stents fail, and the failure rate is somewhere between 20 to 40%, depending on the study. And the good news is that 60 to 80% of the stents don't fail, but 20 to 40% is pretty significant, and I'm sadly in that category. So my stent failed and started to close up, and this guy had me on the angiogram on the table and saw that. And according to the medical record that I pulled later, the quote was, the LAD, which is the left anterior descending coronary artery, moderate sized vessel with 80% proximal ISR and 90% mid stenosis. ISR is in-stent restenosis. So what is happening is when this stent is mashed into the inside of the artery, it damages the artery, and the artery responds by growing tissue around it. And for a while, that's a good idea, because before too long, it covers over the metal stent. And so the blood flowing through the middle of the artery at that point doesn't touch the metal. And that's a good thing, because while the metal's in contact with the blood, you have to take this blood thinner. And that has problems because you bruise easily. And if you bonk your head, you can bleed out because the blood won't stop flowing inside your brain. So you want to get off blood thinners as soon as you can. And this growth of the tissue responding to the damage from the stent emplacement, that's a good thing for a while because it covers over the metal. But in 20 to 40% of the cases, the tissue continues to grow, and it grows the blood vessel closed. And this is no longer my fault, which the original was. This is the fault of the stent that was put in there. And again, according to this medical record, I had ISR, in-stent restenosis. Restenosis means you're closing it up again. So inside the stent was scarring closed, and they could see that. And he said the doctors planned to insert a stent inside the first failed one, and another downstream from that one, and a third in a right coronary artery in a completely different part of my heart. But then he said, as I'm sitting on the table, the medical record said, quote, left main proximal 50% stenosis. This is the left coronary artery that comes off the aorta. He's thought that he saw on the angiogram that was 50% closed. And so he halted the procedure, and he said, I've got to halt and I've got to talk to your family. So he pulls out the catheter, wheels me on the gurney out to talk to my wife. And he explains that this problem that I have with my left main can't be stented, and the only solution is bypass surgery. Oh, crap. So, but the good news for me was that Sunday, when this was happening, there was no bypass surgery team. So it had to wait until Monday. Well, Monday, my friend gets back, and he comes into my room, and he's very politically correct, says that, well, there's some disagreement among the medical team as to the interpretation of what was seen in the angiogram. And it might be true that the left main is problematic, and since it can't be stented, I might need a bypass surgery. But the other interpretation is it's really sort of normal, and I wouldn't need that. But I still needed the stent inside the other one. Now, in the meantime, I had reached out to Caldwell Esselstyn, and he is such an amazing man. Doesn't know me from Adam, but he called me back, and I spoke to him, and he explained this whole thing about how, the original was my problem, but now it's the response of my body to the stent that's causing the new problem. And he said, really, there isn't any other solution but to put another stent inside the first one. And then I said, but they're planning to also put one downstream. And he said, well, that might be needed, but what often happens is as the clog, the first stent starts to block, it causes a reduction in the blood pressure downstream. And so the blood vessel sort of naturally collapses a little bit. It's not really a clog, it's just a low blood pressure collapse. And that once they open up the first stent by putting in another one, that will open up, and you might not need that one downstream. And he said, in the right coronary artery, I had mentioned to him that, the first one was done in a different hospital, the closest one to me. And then the second one, a set of stents were being put in a hospital a little bit further away, but it was the one that I was a member of. So he said they're using different pieces of equipment, different people doing the angiograms and interpreting them. And he did not believe since I had been on his diet for 2 months, that it could have gotten worse, which is what they were telling me. And since it was getting worse, they needed to put a stent in there. So as he said, basically, I needed one stent. Probably that was it. But I got on the table the next day, and I was really worried about whether I was going to get this bypass surgery or not. So I'm listening, and the young guy is nowhere to be seen. The expert crew is there. They take a look and they say, good news, John, we don't need to do bypass surgery. We're just going to go ahead with the stenting as planned. It's like, relief. I really didn't want that bypass. So, but I had forgotten at the time about these other 2 stents. What I found when I went into the records just recently and looked at all my old angiograms, I found out that the first stent they put in was the one downstream. And so they couldn't have put in the the one inside the failed stent first to see if they needed the one downstream. They put the downstream one in first. Okay, well, maybe I got an extra one I didn't need. But then they put in the one inside the first stent, which absolutely needed. And then despite some labeling errors on the angiograms that say they're all left anterior descending, I can tell by looking at them that two of them are on the right coronary artery, and they went ahead and put in what appears to be 2 stents there. They told me they put in 3 stents, but it seems as though from the records they put in 6. That was the second batch of stents were drug-eluting stents. They put a chemical on there to keep to help slow down the scarring, and it does slow it down. The failure rate is almost identical. 20 to 40% of the drug-eluting stents also fail, but when they fail typically not at 3 months like the bare metal stent, but at 9 months. So at 9 months after the second set of stents, I was really worried that I would need more stents. But I was fine at 9 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 9 years went by, and I was enjoying life. And then at that point, I was running 3 miles a day, 5K, 3.1 miles. And as I was running, got to 2.5 miles. Oh, I can feel that in my chest again. This isn't good. Pretty soon it was 2 miles and 1.5 miles and 1.5 mile. I knew that if I went in, they were going to put more stents in. I didn't want that. So I put it off as long as possible, but it got to the point where I couldn't walk 100 feet without stopping. And when I finally did go in to get more stents, I had to stop a couple of times on my way from the car to in the parking lot to the operating room to rest. But I got in there. This time I sought out the best cardiologist that I knew about. His name was Columbus Batiste. He's the speaker on the plant-based circuit. Great guy. Not only does he understand the benefits of plant-based diet, but he's also really good in the operating room. So he went in and took a look, catheterized me, and as he's running the camera, through the blood vessel, he says, "John, you have the blood vessels of a young man." It's like, yay, this 9 years of eating well is proving to work. But then he got to the point where the stents were, and of course they're all messed up, and the tissue growing through the double stent there was so thick that he had to cut some incisions in it in order to be able to get so that he can compress that and get it opened up again. But he did his magic, put in 2 or 3 stents, not quite sure how many, but I walked out of the hospital later that day, all the way back to my car without having to stop. It's very immediate, and pretty happy with that for about 5 years. And that brings us up to today, or just about. So a month or 2 ago, I started having problems again. This was, let's see, checking my calendar here. This was June 26th. I had 2024. I started having chest tightness at just 2.5 miles into my run. And I thought, oh, I recognize this. This is not good. But then, unlike before, it doesn't just continually get worse now. June 27th, I was out running again. I ran my full 3.1 miles. I was fine. Weird. Was okay until July 3rd. And then I had a chest tightness at 1 mile. Ooh, that's unusual. But then I kept running and was okay for a while. And then July 15th, a very odd thing happened at about 2.5 miles in. All of a sudden, my left bicep felt really strange. It wasn't a shooting pain, but it was like I had just lifted 100 pounds, 50 times, and that muscle was just exhausted, and I couldn't lift anymore. And so I stopped running, walked a few blocks, and just as suddenly as it started, it went away. And so I ran the rest of my way home, and that was okay, but I've heard that there are problems in the left arm can result from heart problems. So I thought I better see somebody. So I contacted Columbus Batiste. At this point, I had been on the speaking circuit myself at some of the same conferences that Columbus spoke at, and uh, knew him quite well. And of course, that was what led to him putting in my stents 5 years before. But I found that he has been elevated not only to chief cardiologist of his hospital, but chief cardiologist of the chief cardiologist of all of Southern California, which is wonderful from the standpoint of he can now help promote plant-based eating as a cardiac solution, but he no longer sees patients. So he recommended to me a cardiologist near me, and I went to make an appointment with her, but she didn't have one available for like 2 or 3 weeks. And I thought, well, this is possibly urgent enough that I'll just take whatever cardiologist is available soonest. And what's going to happen, I'm sure, in this first appointment is they're just going to order a treadmill test for me. And so it doesn't really matter who the cardiologist is that I see now. It will matter who's going to interpret the results of that treadmill test and who's actually going to, if I need more stents, who's going to put them in. That's important. But I didn't think it too important who I saw first. So I just took the one that was available right away. And so I was in the medical center in the room waiting for my doctor. He strides in, takes a quick look at the computer screen there, says, he doesn't even ask me what my symptoms are or anything. He just says, "You're not on any medications." I said, "No, I'm not." And I said, I've read research papers that suggest that these statin drugs have problems. And for somebody in my situation, the downsides outweigh the benefits. And so I'm not on any medications. And he said, "Did you go to med school?" I said, "Well, no." And I didn't have a chance to say, but I read hundreds of medical research journal articles. And I've, in the last 10 years, I've been to 10 medical conferences, which is probably more than he'd been. But, I didn't have a chance to say that. He said, "Well, how about blood thinners and aspirin?" I said, "Well, if I get a stent, I'll be on those for 9 months happily. Yes." After that, the research suggests they're not of benefit. And he says, "Well, if you're not going to take medications, I'm not going to be your doctor." And he stomped out of the room, slammed the door. Wow. This is the shortest cardiology appointment I've ever had. If his intention was to test whether I could survive high blood pressure, man, I was so mad. But I did survive. And as I was driving away, I got a phone call from the medical organization. They'd heard that something went wrong. They didn't quite know what. And they were very apologetic for this doctor, and immediately made me an appointment with the doctor that I really wanted to see in the first place. And I was able to see her a week or so ago. I'm scheduled for a treadmill test. I have no idea what's going to happen after this. A very strange thing happens to me yesterday morning. I was 2.5 miles into my run, and all of a sudden I feel a surge of energy. It's like usually I'm exhausted at that point, and all of a sudden it's like I can actually run a little faster. And I have no idea what can cause this. And what happens next, I have no idea. But there's possibly good outcomes. One possible outcome is the things I'm experiencing have nothing to do with heart problems. Maybe it's all in my imagination. Maybe my heart is really okay. I don't think that's the case, but I'm hoping. Another possibility is under some conditions, collateral arteries grow in the heart to create a natural bypass. So when there's a clog, the heart tries to make some other ways of getting the blood supply it needs. And I'd like to think that maybe that's happening to some extent, and that I don't ever need another stent. But another possibility is that I may get more stents and may be okay for a while. Although the cardiologist that I saw, this new one, said they're not putting in as many multiple stents as they used to because they're finding they're not that valuable to the patient. It's like, okay, that's good that they're coming to that understanding, but then I said, but if you don't put in a stent, what can you do? And she said, drugs, statins. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to conclude with these thoughts. I encourage everybody to eat healthy, and that's no animal products, no oils or things made with that include oil in their ingredients list. And I really want to encourage people, don't get your first stent. The statistics show that stent maybe reduces the death rate by about 3%. So 97% of the people that would die without a stent still die. So it's not really very effective. And oh, by the way, that study was with a group of people, part of whom were in an emergency, getting a stent in an emergency basis like I did, and others were getting in a non-emergency basis, like you just went in for an appointment with a doctor, he listened to your heart and said, oh, you should have a stent. But there's another study that looked at what's the death rate for the people who get the stents in a non-emergency basis, and the death rate is actually higher than if you don't get a stent. So all the cardiologists who have read this study won't put in a stent in a non-emergency basis, but I can tell you there's a lot of cardiologists out there who haven't read that study, and they're happy to put a stent in you, even though it increases your death rate. So I urge you to eat healthy and don't get that first stent. And if you could, maybe help others eat healthy and help them not get their first stent. And in between there, enjoy life while you can. That's what I'm doing. It's great to be on the show with Glen, and it's just great to be alive. I really appreciate that so much better than the alternative. And if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the things I've learned, I'm trying to share with people, you can go to my website. This is NewSci, the Nutrition Science Foundation. It's www.newsci.org. And you can also go to a healthy food company that I helped make called Little Green Forks. And the address there is www.littlegreenforks.com. And we can ship no animal products, no oils, food throughout 48 states overnight. So thank you so much for being on, and Glen, back to you.
All right, John, thank you so much for that story. And I think you'll agree one of the lessons from your story is that the optimal time to go on the whole food, plant-based or vegan, low-fat diet is when you're young and healthy, ideally from birth.
My definition of intelligence is getting on that diet before you have cardiac arrest. Exactly. I was not intelligent, sorry, but others can be.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting what happened to you yesterday, that you got that surge of energy after running 2.5 miles. I don't think I've ever run 2.5 miles, so I doubt I would get a surge of energy at that point. But I'm hoping that it is what you suggested, corollary arteries forming. And that is the theory behind a technology that I told you about called EECP, Enhanced External Counterpulsation. People can look that up, EECP, and it is a non-invasive technology that essentially reverses your blood pressure. So instead of being 110/70 while you're on the EECP table, you're 70/110, and it pumps blood up in a way that the evidence is that it helps create corollary arteries. So that's a technology that, from the amount of research I've done on it, which is not too extensive, but enough to interest me, I think it's a technology that should be in wider practice, but the economics perhaps militate against that because it was found by the government to be approved only for people who were what they called refractory to standard procedures, stents and statins and so forth. Whereas perhaps it should have been more widely available. So John, we'll be in touch, and I'm hoping that that's what it is. You got those corollary arteries working for you, and you won't need another stent. Let's hope.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John, and I thank Paul Chatlin again, and thank you all for listening to the Plant-Powered Passport. And we have a series of more presentations to come this year for those of you who purchased the Plant-Powered Passport. All right, so thank you, and I'll say goodbye for now.
This has been the Glen Merzer Show, where everyone listening turns vegan, regains their health, and annoys their friends and relatives. Find us on YouTube at The Glen Merzer Show and across all your major podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe.